Hi everyone, and thank you for giving up part of your day today to join me on this webinar, the new normal, accountancy after COVID-19. I'd like to begin by just to be clear that this is not going to be a webinar about adapting to life under lockdown or dealing with social distancing in your workplace. It's not a webinar about the new normal that we're all currently experiencing and facing today. This webinar is about the new normal. And by that, I mean casting our minds forward to a time where we have a choice of widely distributed vaccines to prevent infection, a range of appropriate treatments. I know some of those have been announced very recently in the press to treat those unfortunate enough to contract COVID-19, and a time by and large where we're seeing very few, if any, daily deaths around the globe from the coronavirus. Now, no one can truly say when that time will come, of course. It may be a year from now, it may be longer. But my role at Wolters Kluwer requires me to constantly look ahead 3, 5, even 10 years down the line and try to predict what your accounting practices will look like and how we can utilize technology to continue to meet your needs in that changing landscape. So my name is Dean Shepherd. I worked in general practice for 20 years as an accountant and tax advisor. I now work for Wolters Kluwer as the lead product manager, and I'm responsible for setting the strategy and vision for our tax, accounts and audit solutions. I'm going to share some lessons I learnt along the way from running my own practice and lessons I've gleaned from others along the way too, whether that's other practitioners or some of my clients. And this is in the hope that everyone on this call will come through this unique and difficult situation in a better place and with a better practice than perhaps we have going in. I'd also encourage you to share your own observations, comments, experiences, any questions, any points you want to raise using the questions panel that we have available for you in GoToWebinar. Hopefully you can see the option there for questions. Do feel free to add any comments as we go through, and I'll try and read those out and share those experiences as we go along. So some of the key themes that I want to cover off today are lessons that can be learned from history. Everyone does talk about this situation we're in as being very unique and unprecedented. However, economic upturns and downturns certainly aren't unique. So from that aspect, I think there are lots of lessons that we can learn. We're going to talk about managing a flexible workforce. I think we will inevitably see changes in expectations of our teams and how they're going to work once things not revert back to normal, but perhaps back to some form of normality in the new world. And the changing communications landscape, I think that's a very important piece and something that I would expect to see a big change in how we communicate with each other and our clients. Certainly, the way we're communicating at the moment is very different to how we have done historically, and I think some of those changes could and should be everlasting. And of course, leveraging technology in the new landscape. What tools are around to assist right now and in the future? So I think we'll start with a little history lesson, really. Does anybody recall going to school and sitting on the carpet in neat rows whilst the deputy head rolled in a TV and VCR mounted on a huge roll-in frame? I can see a few virtual nods on the call, and I'm sure a few bemused expressions as well, no doubt. Well, I fondly remember this privileged activity at school, and I also remember a programme that we used to watch on the ITV school service, and it was called How We Used to Live, and it covered the lives of ordinary families during World War II and the post-war era, which was pretty much the full extent of the national curriculum for history when I was at school. Now, I'm sure we could all draw some parallels between life in post-war Britain and rationing and limitation of supplies. But remember, I'm not covering the situation today. I'm looking beyond that, and more specifically, periods of economic upturn that inevitably follow periods of downturn or recessions or depressions. Now, whether this downturn is due to a war or a global health crisis or a global financial crisis, the economic upturn that follows is, I would say, is always inevitable. And what I've got on screen there at the moment is sort of a document that we use internally at Wolters Kluwer. Our strategy guys basically looked at the impact of the pandemic on the economy and how a recovery might take place given different scenarios. So each of these grids kind of shows a different scenario depending on how well a country or globally we've been able to contain the virus. Wolters Kluwer is a global organisation, so we are present in many countries around the world, and different countries are performing somewhat better than others in terms of containing the virus. So those countries will probably expect to bounce back pretty quickly from an economic perspective. But we've kind of looked at a whole range of different scenarios which we think may or may not be more likely, and what the impact would be on those. But with all those scenarios, we do anticipate an economic recovery, and just as we want ourselves to be in a position that when that economic recovery happens, we're right at the leading edge of it, we also want that to happen for our customers as well. But all these kind of predictions and whether we are officially in a recession or officially out of a recession, it's always based on our results as a nation. It's not really looked at an industry or profession level, or certainly not as an individual business or practice level. But there are always exceptions within those figures that buck the trend, and I want to ensure that everybody on this call proves to be such an exception. You're not so hard hit by the recession that you cannot then ride the wave of economic upturn that inevitably follows. So what are the lessons that we can learn from history? Well, one of the earliest recessions that I've lived through was the early 90s recession. And although a lot of industries were devastated as a result of that recession, one of the big impacts I remember from speaking to colleagues on the accounting profession at that time was the wholesale freeze on recruitment, the cancelling of many training contracts. And for the years that followed, there was almost a missing generation of accountants coming through who should have been filling the part qualified, newly qualified roles, and those people were absent from the talent pool because of that kind of wholesale freezing of recruitment and cancelling of training contracts. And the very firms that kind of instigated these drastic but for them very necessary measures were the firms that were suffering a little bit later down the line because they were less able than other practices to scale their workforce back up again when the economy improved. And with this in mind, talent elasticity is something that we talk about internally at Wolters Kluwer. Other people refer to it as a liquid workforce, an adaptive workforce. And at its simplest, it's about finding the right blend of full-time permanent staff with part-time seasonal freelance staff that can be turned on and off a little bit more flexibly as and when demand increases or reduces. I think accountancy as a profession has a bit of a reputation of being a little bit behind the curve in some respects, and being very traditional in the way that people operate their businesses. But again, that's a generalization. It's individual practices to decide whether they want to book that trend or not. Now, at its worst, this kind of talent elasticity is an expensive cycle of aggressive hiring and firing, which no HR professional of good standing would recommend. But done well, it can really help a business be agile, allows them to react to events that either increase or decrease demands on particular skill sets. And cross-skilling of teams is a key element of talent elasticity, not just delving in and out of a pool of freelance skill sets, but really cross-skilling the teams that you have. And speaking to some firms, they already do this very well today in order to manage demand across a normal tax season, for example. So each year, when it's all hands on deck in January, then teams are moved from one department to another. That's very common. However, I do still find in speaking to firms that it's still very reactive. I mean, it shouldn't be very reactive. Everyone knows January's coming, but it can happen as a bit of a panic. Right, let's grab some people from the accounts department, shove them into tax for the month to see this thing through. Whereas real talent elasticity would have a program of knowledge sharing, and these relief workers, for a better phrase, would actually be engaged with the tax department and doing tax work to a lesser extent, but throughout the season, so that when demand is at its highest, then you have people that are ready and able to really contribute to that increased demand, rather than, as sometimes happens from my own experiences, that you get given a load of people from the accounts department who, yes, they've had some tax training, but it's probably quicker just to do the tax returns yourself rather than review the mess they've made of them. So it's certainly a more active program of cross-skilling and actively working in different teams to retain those skills when you need them the most. Now, technology can also play a key part in this, and having early warning mechanisms for monitoring demand and knowing where you can pull resources from, who's available to deal with that demand, and do they have the right skill sets to do so. At Waters Clear, we've got a couple of tools, mechanisms that our customers use to monitor a whole variety of things within their practice, using the data that's inherent in their CCH Central database. CCH KPI monitoring is one of those tools. It's incredibly flexible and customizable. It can raise alerts and automate tasks based on any number of triggers within your application databases. We also work with our customers on using Microsoft's Power BI analytics tools to give real-time insight into your team's performance. Both of those are incredibly powerful solutions to give you greater control over your practice, so that you're not needing people to physically delve in and constantly do the monitoring for you. The system just as there in the background and raises an alert when it identifies that there's an issue approaching. We have lots of content separately about those products and solutions, so do check those out on our website, and we'll speak to your account manager about those. But with all the best will in the world, if you do have to make people redundant in your practice, if you do have to put a freeze on recruitment or cancel training contracts, then I'm sure that's not a step that as a practice you will have taken lightly. And economically, I think things may get a whole lot worse right now before they get better. But I really recommend that you start planning now for what you think your future workforce may look like. Now, not everybody works as productively from home as they do in the office. Not everybody is great at communicating using video conferencing tools as they are at communicating in person. What skills are you going to need from your team in future if you are going to allow more flexible working, more mobile working, more working from home? And perhaps more importantly, if your clients' expectations of the way that you service them change because of how you're servicing them now is so different. Now, if I was still in practice today, I'd be itching to get my staff back to the office and doing a full day's work again. Problem is, what I'm hearing is that they might not want to come back. We surveyed our team at Waters Clear recently, and I must admit I was very much in the minority of being somebody who is dead keen to get back to the office as soon as possible. Personally, I don't feel as productive at home as I do in the office, not least with the kids to homeschool at the moment. I share somewhat of a study with my wife. She's also been working from home, which presents its own difficulties. We seem to have the county's noisiest builders, who, having put their feet up for the past 3 months, have decided to come back today and start drilling outside the house. So it's not always a conducive environment to do everything that I need to do work-wise. Some people have pointed out to me that maybe I shouldn't be judging my colleagues' levels of productivity through my own lens and my own inability to work as productively from home. But I do think a proper working environment is conducive to being productive. And for me personally, I certainly don't have that at home. However, if we start to see working from home as a minimum expectation across the majority of the wider talent pool and the wider recruitment market, and I really think we will, then firms that want to recruit and retain the best talent will have to have a very good reason not to be offering that kind of flexibility within their standard terms of employment. I think this experiment in mass home working will really reframe how a lot of people will choose to live their lives and who they will want to work for, and how they will want their working day to look. And I think it's quite easy for a firm to manage a few dissenting voices that are demanding vehemently that they should be allowed to work more flexibly and work from home. But I think we really could see en masse everybody saying, come on, why not? I've proved over this period of forced working from home that I am as productive, if not more productive. What good reason have you for denying a request for this to continue? I think we might see that happen en masse. And despite what I've just inferred about not particularly trusting my own staff to work as productively from home, down to how unproductive I am, in my former practice, we were actually reasonably forward-thinking in other areas. We went paperless in, I think, around 2007. We switched all our IT infrastructure to remotely hosted desktops in 2009. And by about 2011, more than 95% of our communications were all digital. More than half of our client base, nobody in the office had met in person. All communications were being done online. Now, if this current pandemic changes nothing else, I would really hope that it finally tips the balance in favour of more firms becoming truly paperless operations, because quite frankly, I'm getting a little bit bored of extolling the virtues of running a paperless working environment. I've kind of been bleating on about it for years. We have the tools, we have the technology, we have the solutions in our suite that you need to run a paperless operation. Yet still many firms are hesitant to do so, and a big driver of that is staff that are just have the comfort of doing things the way they've always done, and it's a big leap to move away from the comfort of paper files. We see it particularly with accounts working papers file, having the comfort of that file open on your desk in the right section, having last year's file open on the desk next to you, and the client's records on the floor. It's a big leap for a lot of people who've worked in that manner for such a long period of time to be doing everything on screen. But I hope with this kind of forced paperless working in many cases, and I do appreciate that lots of practices that are still so reliant on files will be having their team come in and collect files and distribute files and things. But I think, or I would hope that lots of people will, that perhaps who otherwise wouldn't have been working quite so digitally, now having been forced to for a period of time, will actually start to see the real benefits and of doing so, and perhaps be a little bit more open to doing it in future. So I'd really like to see that make a big difference, because it was one of the best decisions that we made in our practice. Another investment we made that really paid dividends, and I've always felt was worth every penny, was moving our entire IT infrastructure into the cloud by using a fully managed and supported hosted desktop provider. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on this one, because I'm going to run a separate webinar purely looking at our what a hosted desktop solution is and how it can help. But they basically moved all our applications and server data, everything really, into the cloud over the course of a weekend. Our entire teams can access all our applications, all their data, their desktops exactly as they were, emails, everything. They can access this from anywhere, any PC in the office, any PC at home, laptop on the move. I'd even log in on my mobile on the train to clients from time to time. It was a really fabulous solution, and actually I'm super excited that we've forged a partnership with the same hosted desktop provider that I used in practice to deliver our own Wolters Kluwer hosting solution. So if you haven't heard anything about it, if you weren't aware that we've got a webinar running next week on Wolters Kluwer hosting, then do sign up for that one. I'll distribute the details after this webinar as well, so you can find out a little bit more about that. But it really was an excellent solution for us in practice. What we also observe in the technology sector in particular is that tech companies tend to double down and invest during a recession, and perhaps more than other businesses do or are able to do. So we often see new advances emerging that change people's behaviors and really change their lives forever coming out of a recession. After the early 90s recession, we of course had the .com boom, which did have its own issues, but it was a period of massive growth in the use and adoption of the internet. After the 2008 global financial crisis, people would give up their house and car, maybe even give up their children before they would give up their mobile phones, such as the reliance that we all now have on our mobile devices. That's a real behavioural change. So what changes might a post-pandemic era bring? Perhaps it will truly ignite the digital revolution that we've all kind of been talking about and been promised for so long. Maybe we'll be able to hold hologram conferences rather than video ones. Maybe I'll finally get the hoverboard that I feel like I've been promised for a long time now. Whatever technological advances that take off seemingly from nowhere, there'll be some very predictable changes that will be entirely up to you as a practice to take advantage of. And the most obvious one, I think, is greater use of video technology and video calls within the practice, whether that's internally, externally, or both. I was an early adopter of Skype in my practice. I've always thought it's far more efficient to be having regular telephone calls with my clients rather than going to see them in person. But for many clients, they want that face-to-face contact, even if they're not necessarily willing to pay a premium for it. It's kind of an expectation. I never had a great deal of success trying to implement video calls more widely with my clients when I was in practice, because video calls were just incredibly unnatural for them. They weren't particularly natural for my team either. And actually, I'm reminded of a story I was once told about the founders of the Coffee Republic chain in the UK. And at the time, they were trying to raise funds to establish a new brand of American-style coffee shops in the UK. There was no real coffee culture in the UK at that time. And whilst they were they'd done a lot of preparation, a lot of market research. They really knew the industry well. They really knew what they wanted to do. They were really confident in their plan, and they were at the point of getting funding. But at that time, two people, I think it was husband and wife from Seattle, not from Starbucks, but they came over to the UK and opened the Seattle Coffee Company in Covent Garden. They had immediate success. They had fast expansion. I think they got up to about 60 outlets very quickly. They were eventually bought out by Starbucks. But whilst this was going on, Coffee Republic's owners thought this is an absolute disaster. I can't believe these two Americans have come in, stolen our market from underneath us. They've got first mover advantage. They've established their brand. This is really blown our business plan out of the water. But actually, what they observed was that, as well as getting first mover advantage, what they'd actually done was come in, spend a huge amount of money educating the UK market. So teaching tea drinking Brits how you even order a coffee, what the vast array of options are, how it all works, making people feel comfortable about the experience that they should be having in one of these coffee shops that I think we all take for granted now. So by the time Coffee Republic secured their funding to open up their outlets, there was an active, educated, coffee-loving market in the UK who knew exactly what they wanted, and Coffee Republic were then able to deliver it with great success. So I see a similar opportunity bubbling up with the adoption of video technology in the UK. This pandemic and the lockdown has kind of taught everybody across the country about Zoom and FaceTime and Microsoft Teams, and for those in business, how professional services can indeed be delivered or received remotely without a necessity for them to always be done in person. So I think we're kind of going through a process of educating the market on how video technology can be used. And I think there's a real opportunity, and I think if I was still in practice now, I'd be looking to grab that opportunity with both hands. So I'd certainly be looking at what services can we start delivering efficiently and effectively using video tools that were previously, perhaps they were uneconomical to deliver because of a reliance on venue, catering, travel, hotels. To worry about minimum numbers of bums on seats. Maybe we had maximum numbers as well because of venue size and budgets. I think the go-to webinar tool that I'm using at the moment has a maximum limit of 500. I think if I'd opted for Microsoft Teams webinar functionality, we could have had 10,000 attendees. So it's certainly a very scalable method of delivery. But I'm also enjoying seeing the increased production values of some of the webinars and things I'm attending. I must admit, it's probably not a great example of a massive increase in production values that I'm demonstrating myself, given that I'm just running a slide deck and sharing my thoughts on top. But I have certainly sat through a lot of kind of mundane, poor audio quality webinars and training videos and things in my time, and I am seeing big improvements in that area and more engaging content. And I think that we will see a big driving up of standards across the board as more people use these more regularly. And I think we will see a time when online delivery of services will actually be seen as more valuable and the preferred option to face-to-face delivery in many instances. I'm reminded of a friend of mine who for many years ran a bricks and mortar training company. It was a perfectly successful business. They'd deliver training either in-house or bring people out to their facility to run courses. Without wanting to offend my friend, they were fairly generic business courses. There'd be health and safety in the workplace courses, all kinds of things. So, there was there was no great niche in there that kind of set them out as different to other training providers. But a few years ago, they started filming all those training courses and just creating some online content. Now, that wasn't, to them, they didn't see that particularly as a big change in their business. They wanted to create materials to support the in-house courses that they were delivering. But what they found and what they evolved into is that actually a lot of people couldn't make the in-house training, so they'd create the online content as well, and then they had the ability to sell that same content over and over and over again at very little incremental cost. And what they then learnt is that actually the shorter they made those online training videos, the better rating they got, and the more their customers were willing to pay for that training. In some cases, they condensed what was previously a half-day training course delivered in-house with coffee and catering and things in a venue into a 14-minute video course with a little test quiz at the end and an automatically generated certificate for the attendee. And the demand for those was far higher than having their trainers come in-house and deliver the content live. He did tell me that on average they were making 165 times the profit on a video training module compared to their previous live training of exactly the same type. Now, that may seem to some people an extreme example of how something can become extremely profitable on a product that on first glance might have been less valuable than delivering something face to face. But that wasn't anything hugely innovative about what they did, and it was all done at a time when I think most people would have placed greater value on face-to-face training than online. There would have been an assumption that online delivery would be cheaper. But don't get into the mindset that delivering an online service or via video has to be less valuable than in person. It doesn't. I think now is a prime time really to look for those opportunities, whilst everyone is somewhat forced to receive those services remotely, whether they like it or not. They will get to see the benefit and the value, and perhaps question whether that is preferable for them rather than having something delivered face to face as it might historically have been. Internally, we're looking at those kind of things too, certainly in terms of delivering our training and professional services support. We do have a backlog of customers that would rather wait for face-to-face training when that becomes available, although obviously we don't know when that's going to be. But most of our customers are open to having training delivered remotely, and we would hope by the time we get through this period of enforced remote working that actually our skills in delivering training and other services remotely will be such that actually we can make it more compelling and engaging and a valuable proposition for people in future as well. I'm sure many of you on the call will know that we have user groups here at Wolters Kluwer. All our customers are able to join those. They run independently of Wolters Kluwer. by the members themselves. We've got user groups in, we've got one in the south, one in the north, very long-standing user groups, one in Scotland. We experimented with one in Northern Ireland as well to get some traction there. Each user group meets either 2 or 3 times a year. We send a team of maybe 8 to 10 people to these user groups to cover things like best practice use of the software, hints and tips, and product demos, let people know what's upcoming on the roadmap, all that kind of good stuff. But there is a limit to how many people it is feasible for us to send to the out of our business for the whole day to attend the user groups and deliver content. So right now we are running those user groups remotely. We're either using the same webinar software we're using today or Microsoft Teams. And I think in our first attempt at delivering these very early in the lockdown, I think they went as well as could be expected. We were very careful to get feedback from the attendees and organisers to find out what worked well, what didn't work so well, and we've got the next round of user groups coming up, and we're going to build in that feedback and make improvements to it. And although I don't envisage us, never going off and delivering all this content and user groups face to face, I think there are a lot of advantages and a lot of things that can enhance the value of them that you don't get with the face to face and the limited number of people that we can send up there. I mean, certainly in terms of numbers, we can have all our product specialists on a user group call when we're on the topic that covers their particular area of specialism. It just wouldn't be feasible for us to bring our whole product specialist team for every product in our suite up to a physical face to face for the day. So it's certainly something that we're looking at and working on internally. And I think if any of your practices aren't looking at those right now, then now is the time to do it. So with being able to deliver more services remotely, having more people working from home, no one's going to need that office space anymore, right? This is a really interesting one to watch. I think looking back over history, downsizing of office space kind of comes in out of fashion, and as a trend, it always seems to happen in the early stages of economic recovery. I think usually often there's been an oversupply of commercial space leading into a contraction or a downturn. So when recovering businesses coming out of recession are still looking to minimize and reduce costs in their period of growth and don't want to overcommit too early, premises and office space tends to be the largest financial commitment. So a new wave of downsizing comes in. To be honest, I think there would need to be a home-working revolution of historic proportions to see that cycle kind of broken permanently and companies en masse looking to reduce their office space permanently in that kind of way. At Wolters Kluwer last year, we completely redesigned our UK headquarters, and we've now got a fabulous space to work from. We already had very flexible working arrangements with most members of our team able to work remotely already. Everybody has laptops and the ability to work remotely, and many members of our team who live the length and breadth of the country would only come into the office for a couple of days each week. But on those 2 days when everybody's there, our office is it's buzzing, it's at near capacity. So I think if we genuinely had a need or desire to downsize our office space, then we would be saying to many of those team either don't come in at all, we don't have the facilities for you, or at the very least we would be staggering how people would come into the office. So we'd have a busier office across the week, but not necessarily same people coming in during the same period of time. I just don't right now. I don't see the evidence that that's going to become the norm. I know a lot of businesses are looking at it because of a financial need to reduce outlay, particularly those that are coming up to lease renewals and are already looking at new premises. They are seriously looking at how they can change their working practices to significantly reduce the need for office space. But I don't see that happening across the board like some are predicting. But time will tell on those ones. I think I would certainly rather lose a lovely new office than any members of our team. So we'll see what happens. That's kind of the key topics that I really wanted to share and cover and discuss today. If I were to summarize some of the things to take away, I think I would say, just because the country as a whole may be entering a recession, I know a lot of your clients are going to be in serious financial difficulty. You do have to think about your own practice. It doesn't need to be that way for you. I think accountants are very resilient. I don't think it would take a huge change in the way you do things, using a bit of innovation to be able to survive any forthcoming recession that we're going to see, even though so many of your clients may be affected. And if you do so, you'll be able to set yourself up for the growth that will follow. I think the most important people in your practice are your team. I used to kind of waver back and forth on this one, depending how well behaved I thought my team were at the time, as to who was most important, my clients or my team. Obviously, I always tell my clients they were the most important, but really it is the team. I think it's far easier to replace a lost good client than it is to replace a lost good member of staff. Finding ways to retain them, if at all possible, I think will pay dividends in the long run. And I think you should trust them more. Ask them to come up with innovative new ways of working. How can they contribute to the continued success of the business? I think they may surprise you with what they come up with. I covered it quite a lot. Exploiting new communication methods now, whilst you'll be forgiven for doing so. Using the user group example, we globally as an organization, we went into home working and voluntary lockdown, if you like, before that was the general advice, because we wanted to be on the front foot with this. We didn't want to leave ourselves as an employer of 20,000 people globally exposed to the pandemic. So we very quickly moved to remote delivery of services, and it came at a time where we were all geared up to do the Northern User Group, which is a very popular event. So it wasn't, I don't think it went down immediately very well that we wouldn't all be going up there as usual and would have to deliver it remotely, but because of the situation, we were forgiven for doing so. So if you are ever going to be forgiven for delivering services remotely, or trying out new things that may not be immediately successful, then now is the time that you'll be given that little bit of rope. So do explore new things and test them out now. And finally, there's never a bad time to invest in technology. I think a lot of people were caught on the hop with being able to have all their teams working remotely. We were geared up very well here to be able to do that very quickly, but we still had problems. I know a lot of practices out there even now aren't using particularly robust IT systems that aren't particularly designed for your teams to be working remotely all day every day. They're more there as working remotely temporarily. I think now is the time to look at a permanent solution, and our hosting solution was a fantastic solution for my practice. It may or may not be for your practice, but I think it's certainly worth something to consider. So that kind of brings me to a close. We've got the usual contact details up there if you need help from support, if you need to look at any training. We've got lots of online training for all our products for your teams. I know we've got a number of people on the line that aren't current customers. If you want to talk to us about any of our solutions, then do give us a call. If you're an existing customer, then you can of course speak to your account manager, who should only be a phone call away. As I said, we'll distribute a copy of the webinar. I'll also distribute links to the webinar on the Waters Clear hosting solution. But thank you very much for joining us, and best of luck with your practices, and I wish you all well. Thank you very much.